Hi, I'm Tori Hagaman. Welcome to my studio. I've been having the best time for the last couple of weeks working on this painting that I've just finished. And in this video, I'd love to show you how I put in the peonies. Even though I've done a video before on peonies, I used a completely different method on these. I found it much easier, and I felt like the results of these were so much nicer and more beautiful than anything I've done before. And I'd love to share this new method with you. Stay tuned. And I wanted to show you the colors that I've mixed that are going to be the majority of the peonies. And this is a Gambling Quinacridone Magenta. And I've just continued to add a little more white. Some of the peonies will be a dark purpley red with white on the edges. Some of them will be these lighter colors with a little bit of the pink in the center. I've also used this color called Magenta, which is a real reddish purple. Here I've added some white to that with a little ultramarine blue for a shadow color. And here I've added in a little bit more of that magenta for a shadow color. Okay, I've been debating what method I'm going to use to paint these peonies. There are different ways to do it. I'm going to try one this way with this brush and we'll see. I'm going to use this Rosemary & Company Classic Long Flat. It does not have a chiseled or fine edge to it. It's kind of a rough brush, and it's been well loved. I'm going to start out with our medium value. I've dipped my brush in the Gambling, so I'm thinning this paint out, and I'm just going to push this brush with this medium value and just work on some of these outside edges. I got a little too thin. Just trying to kind of get a feel for where these, and you know, if this is too exaggerated, you can always go back in and put in a background and cut back into it, but I'm thinking I'm going to be leaving this red. So I'm trying to kind of get that outside looking right the first go round. Just make sure you've got enough distinction. And it's that outside shape. Getting a pretty outside shape is really important with peonies. See, already, if you stood back from this painting, you would be able to tell that that's what that was. So again, I'm just scrubbing this in. I am kind of going in the direction of like from the center of the flower out. I'm not painting it this way. I'm going in the direction that the petals would be going. And then these are a couple of lighter petals that are on top. Go back to my little photograph. And we've got some petals that are sticking out at the bottom. Okay. Now we're going to go back in, and again, I'm going to dip my brush in just a little bit of the Gamsol. One of my biggest issues with oil paint is I tend to get it too thick too fast, and I end up with this big mess I end up having to scrape off. So I'd rather get it too thin than not enough. So I'm going to drop back in front of these petals. Isn't that pretty? So this is just the next. So this is what I did starting, and I'm just going, I think I went into this or maybe in here, just getting a little bit darker value. And you know, I'll be going back over this, getting as thicker. I mean, you're seeing the bottom color coming out, but gosh, that's pretty. I do have a picture of a peony that I'm going by. I never could find, you know, the overall picture that I wanted, so I'm just getting some individuals. I'm going to go into our darkest solid magenta. So there's a big, so you can kind of use the darks to carve out. So I'm just looking at where are these darks, and I'm just starting to put those in. Like I say, there are different ways of doing this. This just seemed like the way for this one for me. We'll try it. And I wanted to try some different brushes, but I'm really liking how this is handling a lot. So I'm going to clean my brush off. I'm just going to wipe it with a paper towel. And I'm going to go in to my lighter pink that has more of the white without the Gamsol. I do have some Gamblin solvent-free gel on my palette. If the paint, I might use a little bit of that just to get a nice flow. So let's see what we can do. So again, because this brush is a little rough on the end, I don't know if you can see, I'm getting these nice little brush marks just from that brush. I'm turning it a little bit. Very nice. Wow, I'm pleased with how this is starting out. I hope this is a sign of things to come. We shall see, huh? Want to get it real light on that outside edge. You know, you don't want to use pure white everywhere, or you kind of lose the drama of those highlights. So keep your pale pink as highlights and just use that whitest white where you really want to kind of knock someone's socks off. Like there's a little edge right there. And there's a petal right here that comes out a lot more than I've drawn it. Now I'm going back into that kind of medium pale pink that we started with, but I'm not using a thinner. So that's a little bit thicker paint. I'm going to step back from this. Wow, that's looking really pretty. Let me let you see what it looks like from back here. It's funny when you get away from it, it's like, wow, it's starting to get some shape. So you can shape things with your light values or your dark values, or do them at the same time. I usually start with darker values and work to the lighter. So there are a lot more petals in here that we could get, and there's a yellow in here. Let's, if I thought about it, I might have put some of that in first. I'm going to put some of that Indian yellow, drop that right there in this center. Okay. So I'm going to go back and just continue to be mindful of my values. I'm going to just define these petals a little bit more. You can pull that dark back in. You can push the light back in. You know, once I go over this, I'm probably going to go back and redefine the darks a little bit. I am just very lightly taking my brush around that edge. There are a few places here I want to make sure I do get them like that one white enough. And here's the place, there's a tiny bit of a shadow right there where this bends. I'm going to put that in. Let's see where else we see some shadow. This is the magenta and white with the tiniest touch of blue. I'm seeing a lot down in here. I'm just going to go in and drop a few more white edges. And I'm just putting more pressure on the brush than pulling up on the brush to get a wider or thicker line. There's a big something that comes up. Add a little more white to that without the center. So there's so much center in that it's kind of blending in. So I may even let that dry a little bit. Just got paint on my phone. Then I smeared it and got a lot more paint. Gosh darn. I'm gonna have to take a minute and deal with my phone here. This might be a nice little time to take a break. So here I have the first two peonies in. I probably will go back in later and add a few more petals, a little more detail to that center, but that'll kind of give you an idea where we're going. For this center one, I think I'm going to do a white flower, and this is where I'm going to put the Indian yellow, the transparent yellow, in the center. And then I'm just going to pre-mix some whites with the little yellow mixed in for the top petals, and down at the bottom put in a little ultramarine blue for the shadow, and we'll just see how that looks. You know, I'm liking these pink ones so much. I'm wondering if I ought to do the whole thing that way, but I think it might be more interesting to mix them up a little bit. So that's what I'm going to do next. So one of the problems that I ran into with that middle flower, I wanted to have a nice glow underneath and put petals on top. So I used Indian yellow, which is a transparent color. I haven't used that in years, but as I recalled, you can put that underneath a white flower and get this beautiful glow. Well, what I failed to remember, and it was just one of those duh moments, because that would have been true if I'd been painting it on a white canvas, but because I was painting that Indian yellow, which is in the center of that middle flower, on top of a red house paint. And if you're wondering about the house paint, I have a whole playlist of videos on my channel about why I use house paints, and it was great as an underpainting for this painting. But if you paint a transparent color on top of a color, you lose that benefit of the transparency. So anyway, as I started laying in, so you'll notice that the shape of this flower is very different. The other two peonies had a very ruffled outside edge, where this one had more of a wide, more solid outside edges for their petals. And as I started laying in the smaller petals in the middle where the Indian yellow is, they just immediately started bleeding together. And I was so dissatisfied. It was really turning those white petals to where they looked very yellow. So I ended up having to leave that until it dried, where the center of it dried, and then I went back on and put on petals. And I felt like the color was so distracting. I actually ended up putting in a yellow ochre, which was much more subdued. And here you can see I was just a lot more pleased with the yellow ochre. So just wanted to give you a little notation about that, what to do and not to do. And here I've moved on to the next flower, and I've used the exact same process. I put a little thinner in with my cream colored paint, and I just push that brush up, getting that outside edge in first. And it gave me a completely different shape of flower, but the exact same method. And I found just getting that outside edge in first, then you can add petals in the middle, and it's kind of like clouds. Nobody's going to know if they're off a little bit, but it's that outside edge that really gives a flower that distinct look and profile. I'd like you to notice also in between that top white flower and the bottom big pink one, you'll notice there's a darker magenta flower there. And notice how few petals. I really just used that scrubbing method, and that was really all that I did. So you don't have to put in a lot of petals. That'll show you how you can really just use that brush and get a beautiful outside edge and get a looser, more impressionistic look if that's what you choose. Here I'm just continuing to add more flowers using the same method. Now I'm going to quickly show you how I did this big one at the bottom and the one that was closed. So I'm taking that quinacridone magenta with my thinner, and I'm just quickly putting in an outline. I'm in the places where the petals are kind of ruffled, I'm just using the side of my brush and poking it out, and then places where the outside of the petals are smooth, I'm just doing a smooth line. Uh, Nothing complex. I'm taking that magenta, that darker color, and I'm putting it in the center of the flower and a couple of places in the photograph where I'm seeing darker spaces. Now I'm working on one of the flowers that was more closed. And I think it's important if you're going to have a lot of flowers, particularly with peonies, to have them in different stages of being open and closed. It just makes it a lot more interesting. But I'm doing exactly the same way. I'm starting with everything kind of thinned out, and then I'm going back with both these flowers, adding some white, adding a little more thickness, putting in extra petals, letting that thin paint from underneath kind of bleed into the paint on top a little bit. So this will show you that you can continue to add in petals to your heart's content if you want to get that flower really complicated, or like the flower I showed you earlier in the painting, you can just pretty much get the outline and people can tell from that what it is, and you don't have to do anything that's complicated. I was just having a good time and just kept adding and adding. Now I'm working on that flower that's at the top that's more closed. I'm being mindful that the light source is kind of on the left and above. Don't be afraid of getting some petals very, very light and some areas of the flower very, very dark. It's that contrast that's really going to help give that flower form. I actually ended up, after this, I filmed this, I went back and kind of touched it up again. Sometimes you can cover up those fine lines where those petals are coming together, and I'll just took a liner brush and reestablish them again. But I love doing them in different stages. I think that just makes your painting a lot more interesting. Here's an additional bud that I ended up adding. Again, just trying to have my peonies in a variety of different stages. I thought that was pretty. And then I decided to put them in a glass bowl, and here I put in the stems. And you'll also notice I've just put in a lot of leaves. Leaves are great to fill in problem areas. There are a couple of areas that, oh, that doesn't look quite right, and I just stuck a leaf there. So here's the finished painting. I'm probably going to do a number of videos from this one painting. I know I'm going to do one on painting blue and white. I may do one on reflections as well. So if you'll subscribe to my channel, you'll be sure not to miss that next video that's coming out soon. And hey, if you would like slower instruction, I've got very inexpensively priced courses and shorter tutorials on my website. I'd love for you to check those out. I'll put a link in the description box below. Thank you for watching. I don't take your time lightly. God bless.